everyone to the Indo-American Art Council's annual literary festival. This year, we celebrate our 6th year of bringing you authors, thought leaders, and storytellers from around the world. Many of these stories originate from the Indian subcontinent, and today we celebrate these voices that have been shaped by the Indian ethos and experience. In these unprecedented times, our collective shared experiences have uplifted us and have reshaped our perspectives. For our 2020 festival, we invite our authors to take center stage to bring people together through the art of storytelling. Today, I'd like to invite Ms. Balli Jaswal, who is the author of 4 novels, including Singapore's Literature Prize finalist Sugar Bread and the international bestseller Erotic Stories for Punjabi Widows, which was a selection for Reese Witherspoon's book club. Her debut novel, Inheritance, was the Sydney Morning Herald's Best Young Australian Novelist Award. Jaswal's nonfiction writing has appeared in the New York Times, Cosmopolitan.com, Harper's Bazaar India, and Salon.com, among many other publications. Her latest novel, The Unlikely Adventures of the Shergill Sisters, was released to critical and commercial acclaim in 2019. A former writing fellow at the University of East Anglia, she teaches creative writing at Yale and US College. Welcome, Balli.
Thank you.
Moderating today's session is New York native writer Pia Padukone. She is the author of Where Earth Meets Water and The Faces of Strangers. While working on her 3rd novel, Pia is also the creative director of copy at a New York City advertising agency. With that, I'd love to invite Pia to open this evening's sessions. Welcome, Pia.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I am very excited to be moderating this session with Balli. Balli and I met a couple of years ago at the Singapore Writers Festival, and have been in touch and sort of been sisters in writing since. So it's wonderful to have this conversation with her on her 4th novel. So I'm just going to read a little bit about the book. So those of you who haven't read it can really want to read it after this. So, The Unlikely Adventures of the Shergill Sisters. The British-born Punjabi Shergill sisters, Rajni, Jasmine, and Sharina, were never close and barely got along growing up. And now, as adults, have grown even further apart. Rajni, a school principal, is a stickler for order. Jasmine, a 30-year-old struggling actress, fears her big break may never come. Sharina, the peacemaking good sister, married into wealth and enjoys a picture-perfect life. On her deathbed, their mother voices one last wish, that her daughters will make a pilgrimage together to the Golden Temple in Amritsar to carry out her final rites. After a trip to India with her mother long ago, Rajni vowed never to return. But she's always been a dutiful daughter and cannot even now refuse her mother's request. Jasmine has just been publicly fired from her television job, so the trip to India is a welcome break to help her pick up the pieces of her broken career. Sharina's in-laws are pushing her to make a pivotal decision about her married life. Time away will help her decide whether to meekly obey or to bravely stand up for herself for the first time. Arriving in India, these sisters will make unexpected discoveries about themselves, their mother, and their lives, and learn the real story behind the trip Rajni took with their mother long ago, a momentous journey that resulted in Mum never being able to return to India again. So if that's not enough to make you want to read this book, I don't know what will, but so I'm just going to dive in and just ask, how are you? How, we're in the middle of like one of the strangest years of our lives. How are you doing?
I think one thing that has come out of this really weird experience is that we all have realized that there's almost this wave that the entire world is riding emotionally. Like we all recognize some of the same things. Like there was a bit of hope, and then there was a bit of desperation, and there were lots of goals being set about all the time we were going to have. I have so much time, I'm going to, and then there was all the sourdough that was being baked, and then there was all the social media that was being consumed. So I think I'm riding the same wave as everybody else. I think that's just universal and global. So right now, just hoping for some good news about a vaccine, maybe, but also not holding my breath, because I think that this is just just how it's going to be for a while, and I've just had to accept that. Yeah.
Yeah.
How about yourself?
Yeah, it's been a roller coaster, especially here in New York, in the US. You know, it's been ups and downs, and I wish I could say I've been writing more than I have been, but you know, it's been an interesting time. You know, it's funny. Like I thought back, you know, 4 years ago, on the election in the US, and I was writing the same novel that I'm writing right now. I've been working on it. And it's funny, like the election, I ended up taking my novel in a very different direction because of the results of the election. And it was very cathartic for me to write that, even though it ended up being scrapped later on. So kind of similarly to that, like how has the pandemic, if at all, kind of changed or directed the course of your writing, and what you're working on right now?
It's
sorry about that.
It's caused me to be, I think, a bit more introspective, I suppose, and to think about limitations of space a little bit more. The novel that I'm working on at the moment actually is about 3 Filipina domestic workers in Singapore who kind of band together to help to prove the innocence of another domestic worker who's been accused of murder. And before the pandemic hit, I was interviewing domestic workers. I was kind of going into the spaces where they gather on their days off, and you know, just doing a lot to kind of immerse myself in that world, and feeling really great about the fact that I was finally writing a novel about the place that I was in. Because so many times with my other novels, I've gone to the place, and then that place has kind of developed in my memory and then developed in my imagination as a result of that. So now I was actually writing almost like about place in real time. But then the pandemic hit, and suddenly I was at home all the time. But lots of issues involving the government and our migrant workers, and like employers and migrant workers and domestic workers started to come up during the pandemic, especially because of all the restrictions around movement, and the fact that these women were kind of in an in-between land of you know, not being able to go back to their families, and also like staying in their employers' homes all the time. Like they weren't even allowed to stay at home because they don't have homes here. They have to kind of stay at their place of employment all the time during a pandemic, and there were just lots of issues that came out of that ended up actually feeding into the novel a little bit, and made me kind of understand their struggle even more, I suppose.
So did the course of your novel kind of change a little bit based on that, or did you sort of stick to sort of real life and normalcy, the way that you wrote the book?
Mostly it stayed the same because of the stage that it was in when I started writing it. So you know, I had been writing quite a bit of it when the pandemic hit. So I kind of had like the plans for it already. But then there were a couple of things, like not to give too much of it away, but this is another thing that's familiar to everyone around the world. You know how, like, again, at the start when all these cities are going into lockdown, and there were these viral videos of people like cheering for healthcare workers from their windows. I'm sure you did some version of that in New York.
Absolutely.
So we did something like that here in Singapore as well. And I remember like kind of being unexpectedly swept up by it. Like I didn't exactly join in, but I was kind of like, oh, that's so nice. And that kind of solidarity in that community, and that the way that people did actually use social media to kind of plan a time and all get together, it made me think of an alternative scene for something that I was plotting for the book, like something that would be a much more realistic form of protest in the novel, I suppose. So so some things that came out of the lockdown, some of that restriction of movement, I think kind of played into the restriction of movement that was already there for the characters.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I did not expect to go into your next novel.
I've said too much.
Yeah. No, I love it. It's because, you know, we're all very present, and I think a lot of it is that we're living day to day. So you sort of take in what you are taking in, and that comes out on the page. That comes out, you know, in doing. Okay, really let's talk about the Shergill Sisters, because I read this book, you know, a year and a half ago when it came out here in the States, and I loved it much as I loved your erotic story. very much. You know, and I don't have a sister. I don't have sisters. I have a younger brother, and I think you do as well, right? Brother.
An older brother. Yeah, I don't have sisters either.
Yeah. So I mean, the thing that I loved about this book is the are mean, like really mean to each other a lot of the time, but like I think there is that underlying thread of just familial love and how did you get at that? How did you get at that sort of that like indescribable intricacy that these three women had when you don't necessarily have that yourself?
I was really fascinated with it. I think like I was just really interested in the bond that sisters have that seems to be like friendship, but also it has this kind of permanence and this elasticity that friendship doesn't necessarily have. Like you can do a lot to your sisters. You can say a lot. You can be, you know, very, very brutally honest with your sisters. And they can get mad at you and they can say lots of horrible things back and the bond still remains. I never had a relationship like that in my life. It's definitely very different from a brother-sister relationship. And they know each other's vulnerabilities really well as well. And they also see in each other their own weaknesses. So there are these overlaps of like, she's so different from me. Why can't she just be more like me? And also, ooh, she's a lot like me in this way. I have a lot of friends who have sisters and sisters who are pretty close in age. So when they would complain to me about their sisters or when they would talk about their sisters and the sort of things that they got up to, I think I just kind of took mental notes without realizing that I was really going to write about them. And then when I thought about the premise of a pilgrimage and you know, some women going to fulfill something in a place that felt like home but wasn't exactly home as well. It just made sense for that relationship to need all of the healing that you could get from a trip like that, but then also be able to kind of create lots of conflicts and lots of disruptions to the journey. So it just kind of made sense to delve into the sister relationship.
Yeah. I think it's, you know, I think all these life things always bring those things up, right? Like births, deaths, weddings, right? Like all of these like very, very emotional things bring these underlying things that you've kind of been like able to keep under the surface. They just rise kind of just naturally. So it felt very real to have this trip happen. And all of the mess that came with it happen as well. You know, I could imagine this being a real thing. And you know, I don't know if my next thing is a question. I just wanted to talk about it a little bit, but in your work, both Erotic Stories and Shergill Sisters, secrets play such a big role in both books, but like particularly this one, each sister comes on this trip and has this secret that they don't want revealed to the others. Talk about the power of the secrets and sort of how you came to each of them and why you decided, like, was there ever a point where you thought, I'm not going to divulge one of these secrets? Or, you know, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily know where the secrets were always going. I think this novel was very different from other things that I had written in that I came up with the idea fairly quickly and didn't have much time to kind of let it settle and let it develop, because I was on kind of this treadmill of, you know, you've written one book and now you've signed a deal for another book and there's your follow-up and you're just going to have to write it. And here's your time, like that, you know, it starts now. Yeah. And so I just kind of threw in, it was very weird for my process because I do like to know like what's going to happen to some degree, even though I'm aware that it changes. And for this, I really had to let go of that and just kind of throw things into the mix. And then at the end, tie all these things together and decide, okay, well, that's the, you know, that thing that she was keeping from us. Maybe it's revealed in this way, or, you know, that little quirk in the character, maybe it becomes a bigger thing, or that little event, maybe that actually leads to a resolution. So in terms of process, it was a little bit different. But I am very interested in the secrets that women keep from each other, especially women who are related to each other. And I think that's a common theme in all of my books. I would say, like in my novel Sugar Bread, which is set in Singapore, and it's a little bit more autobiographical, I suppose, than my other work, because it's a coming of age story in Singapore. There are lots of secrets in this girl's family, and she tries to kind of decipher her mother's relationship with her past through the food that her mother cooks. And I feel like that's very much of the culture as well, of kind of like not talking directly about our secrets and not talking directly about the things that plague us, but revealing them in other ways, revealing them in these other ways of loving and other ways of I don't know, just caring for each other. And so yeah, I just find that very interesting. Plus, like, secrets are just fun for like for writing, you know, in general. Like,
well,
they just lead for entry.
You're right. Like,
yeah,
moving forward, wanting to know,
yeah,
like, what is the secret? How is it going to come out?
yeah,
You know?
yeah. And I do think that women, particularly women of the diaspora, there is this duplicity in our lives anyway, because our identities are so dual, right? Our identities, we grew up, even if they're not kind of deep dark secrets, or they're not terribly damaging secrets. We do have these lives, these public lives and these private lives that are quite distinct from each other, at least culturally. So it kind of makes sense that this kind of double life leads to us kind of withholding some things, or having shame around certain things that kind of grows and develops into secrets and scandal, I suppose.
That's interesting. I find, though, that do you find, actually, I find this, but like with each generation, some of that dichotomy starts to break down a little bit more. Like, probably, not to bring my mother into this, but probably my mother had more secrets, than I do, and probably my daughter will have fewer, or maybe they'll be just different secrets, right? Like,
yeah. Well, that was why I was so interested in kind of having a story about British Indian sisters going to India, because there's this expectation that they kind of have, but they also kind of know better. There's an expectation that they have, like, oh, this is the homeland. This is where I'll find like my true home, or my true place of belonging. But when they arrive there, it kind of affirms what they also, probably knew, that this place is quite different and they stand out. And culturally, it's not quite the same. Even the language, like, just everything, they react differently to it, and the place reacts differently to them as well. So I think, again, there's this double identity that they have to keep navigating.
Yeah. Do you, I definitely feel like that when I go to India. There's the part of me that's like, well, this is where my family is from. And, had my parents not chosen to leave, this would have been my home, and I would have known the intricacies of the culture and the unwritten and unspoken rules. Do you feel like that as well when you go to India? Like, do you feel?
Yeah. So I never really, because my parents were born in Singapore. We didn't really grow up with kind of trips. Like, we didn't have any family in India, or any close family anyway. Like, there were distant uncles and distant relatives that we didn't know very well. So I actually only started going to India in adulthood, when I had a friend who was from Mumbai. I went to her wedding. And I think it was in my late 20s by then. So I was like 27 by then. So it was quite late. And Mumbai, it's great. It's such an awesome city. It's such a great entryway into India, but it also isn't very representative of India.
Yeah.
So and especially her life in particular wasn't like, they definitely hung out, and I saw more of nightclubs than I saw of any sort of Indian culture that I was supposed to get from that trip. But I think the real kind of experience that I had that mirrored the experience of the Shergill sisters was the trip that I took, which makes sense. The trip that I took to research this book. So I actually kind of planned out an itinerary. I went with my parents. and we went to a lot of the same places that the Shergill sisters went to. And I tried to kind of, so I knew who the characters were by then, but I didn't really know the story. I definitely didn't know the setting very well. And my initial plan was to kind of get a sense of the physical setting. But of course, if you have the characters in mind, then you start to think about how the characters would react to the place. And I started kind of like tuning into all of the diaspora people that I encountered, the British Punjabi people, or the NRIs, just from all over the world, especially the Golden Temple, because it was like kind of this heart for, the Sikh communities from all over the world, right? So it was very global. I found just observing them and watching them and seeing this kind of fascination that they had with what was home, but then also this kind of distance, like, I don't really get this, or like, why are we doing it like this? So there was this constant kind of inner conflict of this return that just kind of fed into the novel and became much more pronounced in the novel as a result of that trip.
Yeah. Your scenes at the Golden Temple are some of my favorite. I've never been, unfortunately. I think there's one line about that you write that's actually very relevant to this festival, because this festival celebrates humanity. And the line is, visiting the Golden Temple is about recognizing the oneness of humanity. So I loved that line. And I think, the oneness of humanity is something that is like a theme of this year, right? Like it's really come to light that we are really all the same. Yeah. We are just as vulnerable, and we are all just as powerful, if you think about it. Can you talk a little bit about the theme of oneness and how it ties into the story and sort of what, because really I read that line and I was like, wow, this really, like, if the whole tagline thing, right? Like, if you had a tagline for your book, I thought, gosh, this would really sum it up beautifully.
Well, I mean, it's great to hear that the idea of oneness kind of really resonated with you, and it made you think as well about this year and this global pandemic. Because one thing that one of the flip sides of this idea that we're all the same, or this is affecting all of us, has been that lots of inequality has emerged. Like, lots of we've learned more, I think, about inequality. Certainly in Singapore society, there was a huge reckoning about that as a result of COVID-19, and that's something that I really, really wanted to explore as well, because it's certainly the goal is that oneness of humanity. It just seems, it's deceptively simple, that we're all the same, and we all have limited time on the earth, and we're here to make things better for everyone, because we're all the same, and we all just want better things for ourselves, or we all just want to be content and peaceful. How that gets distorted, though, how so many other complexities of humanity derail that plan, is something that really interests me on a personal level, as a friend, as a wife, as a parent. That really interests me, and certainly as a writer, because there's always this question of like, why is it so hard? Like, why is it so hard for us to see beyond ourselves, I suppose. And I don't think anyone's immune to that. I think we all hold this dual idea of, yes, of course we're all the same, so no, we're not. I'm different from you. I have more than you. You have less than me. You've had more than me. Therefore, I deserve more now. Like we do a lot of that, to an increasing degree. I think we do a lot of that, and I just find that really interesting. Like I find it really kind of ripe for storytelling, ripe for conflict, because I think it's just an aspect of the human condition that we can only really try to approach and try to start understanding by telling stories.
Yeah, and that is so powerful, right? Like I think so much of why we write is to bring that to light. Like I think, there was that I don't remember exactly the specific stat, but it was like something about how people who read novels are proven to have more empathy and more understanding for others than people who don't. So, I mean, there's clearly something to what you're saying, right? Like there's a reason, like these stories are bringing humanity to light, and it's important. It's really, really important.
I mean, how many times have you read a novel and then you walk out onto the street and you actually encounter someone in a situation very similar to what you've just been reading about? Like, I've certainly met characters from novels on the train, like I've been reading, and then all of a sudden I look up and there's that person, and I am obviously projecting. But the novel has also, done its purpose in shedding some light on aspects of humanity that maybe I was too busy to consider.
Absolutely, yes, that's very, very true. Yeah. I mean, we could spend the next part of our conversation all about this topic, but I want to shift us back to your book. Actually, this is an interesting question I have. You mentioned, I know Erotic Stories has been optioned by Ridley Scott's production company, which is so exciting. And I believe that the Shergill Sisters is also being optioned for a TV show. Is that right?
Yes, a TV series. Yeah.
That's so exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I've thought about this, and I've always imagined like my books sort of being put on the stage. Have you sort of pictured who you might want to play the roles? Have you thought about that in your mind, like your dream actresses to play the sisters?
Not particularly, and I think this says something about the fact that there are so few roles for South Asian actors, that so few people come to mind, because we have yet to have enough representation that off the top of my head I can't really think. Well, I can think of one or two, but I'll keep it to myself. Okay. But still, it's a little bit of a struggle to think. And one thing that I know, like from the movie talks, and now that we're closer to development stage with Erotic Stories, with the adaptation for that, and for this, is that my goal is really to create more roles, to create more careers, like to make sure that if here's an opportunity to open a door, if it turns out that Hollywood isn't giving enough roles to South Asians because supposedly there aren't enough of our stories, well, I'm going to write those stories. I'm going to create those stories so there are roles. So I'm certainly looking out for, if I have anything to do with casting. I'm not sure if I do, but certainly what I'm pushing for is new talent, people who are breaking into the industry. I just think that's so important, and that's something that like one of the characters goes through. Like Jasmine goes through all this typecasting, and all these issues with like with visibility, and with like she makes one public mistake and her career is over, because people just have this very, very single idea of what a South Asian woman is, and if she makes one mistake, that's it. So I really, kind of want to practice what I preach.
Right? Like even mistake, like, and I think unfortunately brown people are always typecast into being the terrorist or, being orderly or something, right? Like it's never stage. So I think that's wonderful. I think, one of your brethren from Singapore, Kevin Kwan, obviously, did that very thing with Crazy Rich Asians. And brought this whole new, I mean, weren't they like the top grossing movie of that year or something like that, next to Black Panther, which was just spectacular to see. So that's great. Like I can't wait to see what hidden talent you you are able to bring to the forefront through these stories. It's wonderful. It's really exciting. Speaking of that, I took a screenwriting class a couple of years ago, and I learned that that you can really only, even though there's like different narratives and different characters that seem like they're all the same character, or sorry, the the main character. There's really only one main character in your story. So who is the main character in Shergill Sisters? There are three of them, obviously, and you've given, I would say, somewhat equal weight to each of them. But like in your mind, who is the lead sister?
I think Rajni. I think it's Rajni. Like I think, I mean, the story starts with her, and she is, because she's the oldest, she's the leader. She also, I wouldn't know if she has, I don't think she has the biggest secret necessarily. I think Sharina probably has the biggest secret. But Rajni's secret has so many implications for their past and present. So many connections to their mother, and so many connections to, you know, their relationship to India. That, and also like she essentially used to be quite a different person. So she's actually like she's actually in this place where she's changed a lot of who she was. And it seemed like it was going to be kind of this permanent, just going to kind of be in this permanent state of Rajni. Like there was a part where Jasmine gets really frustrated with her, and she says, "You out Rajni yourself sometimes," because she's so Rajni. Right? So her secret has so much to do with like an entire identity that has had this impact on her sisters and the way that they were raised. And so yeah, I think that it, you know, if the series does get made, I think a lot of things will pivot around Rajni and the decisions that she makes and the things that she reveals.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely could see that. There's another line that I really liked, sort of related to what you were saying about Rajni and sort of her trajectory. And it's something, I think it's something like, as we get older, we realize the importance of people we used to take for granted. And that really, really struck me. I think as I've gotten older, but also particularly as I've become a parent, you know, I appreciate my parents so much more than I ever did. You know, I gave them a really hard time, and but just that thought, I think that line really resonated with me. And talk about that a little bit, like how you know the sort of power of taking people for granted can be really painful as well.
Well, I suppose it goes back to the whole like sister thing. Like they've all taken each other for granted in some way. They've taken the relationship that should be a way to get them through these conflicts, and a way to, you know, it should be this network of support that they have for each other. But instead, they've kind of really kind of leaned into all of the fractures. You know, and yeah, again, because Rajni, like that's kind of why I feel Rajni is such a main figure in the story, because she's the oldest, and because she has hindsight. She has the ability to make those calls, and to think, you know, when I was your age, I thought this way, and now I think differently. She's the closest to their mother's age as well when she passed away. And so in that way, like, you know, all these thoughts, all these like, all this turmoil, for example, that Jasmine is having over mortality, like Rajni's experienced that to some degree. All of these issues that Sharina is having with this picture perfect life that isn't, you know, what she thought it would be, and her conflicts with her husband, Rajni's dealt with that to some degree as well, you know, not as severely as Sharina. And so I think, yeah, I think that this, how the novel kind of ends, is the sisters realizing that they can get that wisdom from each other, from not taking each other for granted, from actually looking at each other and considering each other, and holding each other as valuable people in their lives, and as valuable people in their own right. And they don't necessarily need a pilgrimage to do that. Like all the spiritual aspects of the pilgrimage that their mother wanted them to experience, the kind of the results of that happen as a result of, or happen because these women are empowered to kind of look out for themselves. Like it happens on an individual level rather than on this kind of metaphysical level that their mother kind of sent them out for. And we'll never know if the mother's, you know, real intention was that after all, like if she was just trying to trick them into spending time together so they'll have these revelations, or if she thought that there was going to be some sort of that the hand of God was going to kind of nudge them closer together. But I also don't think these things are mutually exclusive. I also think that, like, a lot of rituals or a lot of spiritual practices actually have a lot of very pragmatic grounding in them, or psychological grounding in them. It just depends on, like, which angle you want to look at it through.
And it's really interesting to me too that like the whole aspect of taking someone for granted, or the opposite of that rather, is really like embracing their flaws. I think that's what some of the sisters recognize at the, or all of the sisters recognize at the end, right? They say, well, this is who you are and this is who I am, and there are parts of me that just are not going to change, and I love you anyway, and I accept you anyway, and they make you. So that is a beautiful thing. One other thing that I love about your books, and I would not be true to myself if I didn't bring this up, is just like how feminist they are. They are just, I love them, because I'm just like, these are powerful women. They are tough. They, they're flawed. They have weaknesses, but there is so much feminism in your stories. Like. Not to, I don't think I'm spoilering by saying this, but Jasmine joins a women's march in Delhi, which is so fantastic, and and then
she gets into a bit of trouble for that.
She does. I didn't want. Yeah, she does. But I think it's just so. It just shows their gumption, and these characters that you write are just brilliant. And it makes me want to be friends with them. Is feminism something that you're that's sort of like front of mind when you're writing, or is it just kind of who you are, and so it sort of naturally comes out on the page?
I think a little bit of both. I think there's kind of this perception, I suppose, of South Asian women, that we do just kind of accept things that come our way, or that we're not feminists, or that we don't have agency. And so that's something that I try to dispel through the writing, but I think that's because that's so much of who I am. It's also just the fact that writing gives me a voice that I don't feel like I always have. So writing actually gives me an opportunity to create a world where then which I can then populate with characters who not only voice their opinions and not only kind of push their strengths and discover more strengths, but also emerge triumphant from that. Whereas that doesn't always happen in real life for a lot of people. I mean, the trajectory isn't as neat, the arc of being a feminist and sort of the world kind of yielding to us doesn't always happen. So I think that's what compels me to create these feminist narratives is the idea that they are narratives, and as narratives they have to kind of the characters have to follow the narratives along a journey in which they kind of emerge triumphant.
I mean, they're just so badass, and I love how, I love their spirits. You write really really spirited women, and I really enjoy reading about them. What I'm sure you've done a fair amount of reading during the pandemic. What are you reading lately? What have you read lately that you can't kind of get out of your mind, and some of your favorite authors that you would like to share?
Okay, so a couple of things that I haven't been able to get out of my mind. I think I probably have them on this shelf behind me. Well, I do have, this was very apt, Homeland Elegies. Have you read that? Yeah, very apt for the election, I think.
Okay.
I read it a couple of days before the election, a couple of days after, and it was very good. I also really liked Burnt Sugar by Avni Doshi. Have you read that?
I haven't read that either. I'm making notes.
It's been shortlisted for the Booker Prize, and I really hope it wins. It is like it's like a scalpel. It's so sharp. It's so razor sharp. It's really really good. And then a book that I really loved during the lockdown, and I think I would have loved it anyway, but I think just being, kind of restricted, made me want to kind of travel vicariously through a book even more. And this is the perfect book was The Far Field by Madhuri Vijay. Have you read that one?
On my list. You're going through all my entire list of things I haven't read but want to. Yeah.
It is excellent. It is so interesting. And gosh, the way she described Kashmir, it was just the perfect thing to read when you felt very stagnant, because it was all about movement, and but it was also about like the damage that we do unwittingly to communities that from a place of privilege, when we feel like we want to, we can save people, or when we feel like when we interfere without realizing that we're interfering. Being a city girl goes into kind of a rural area hoping to do things that just don't turn out, and just getting embroiled in the politics and the complexities of a place. It was just so well written, and it was so atmospheric. The characters were fascinating. I wish I could go back to that book. I think I will reread it probably because I loved it so much. Yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna have to move it to the top now. And
yeah, please do.
It's sort of, I mean, I'm sure it's a very different story, but the premise is similar to yours, right? A woman returns to her homeland after her mother passes. Is that?
Yeah, well, she's from Bangalore, but she goes to Kashmir because her mother, when she was growing up, her mother had a friendship with this man who used to sell, I can't remember what he used to sell. He used to sell things door to door. He was Kashmiri. So after her mother dies, she goes to Kashmir because she has some questions for him. Like there are lots of unanswered things from that brief time we knew him. But it's also just about like dispelling the ideas that we all have, because all we see of Kashmir, on TV and in the news is conflict. And just how little, people in India as well know about what goes on over there. And she it just kept me guessing as well. It was a really thrilling story. So yeah.
Oh, good.
Really interesting.
Good.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm excited to grab all three of those stories. I think we are at time, but gosh, I could have chatted forever. So
yeah,
thank you
so
much for in joining us for this conversation, and hope you're able to tune into some of the other events that IAAC is putting on. This is a great lineup, a great festival, and wish you all the best. Thank you so much, Balli.
Thank you, Pia.
Thank you so much, Pia. A fabulous session. Sidebar, Avni Doshi is also going to be part of the lineup. So
I'm such a fangirl.
Yeah, and it's been just listening to both of you speak. I think we're all very interested in seeing how the oneness of humanity plays through stories, and I think it's going to resonate so well with the people watching this session. We could get your books on Amazon. We're going to put up details for you. And the Indo-American Arts Council thanks you for your time and your commitment to the world of literature. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Neeli Lakhani, IAAC Literary Festival Director. I want to thank you for joining our award-winning authors and their wondrous stories. IAAC is a 501c nonprofit. Programs like the one you just watched happen because of contributions from generous folks like you. Please donate to the IAAC so that we can support our artists and sustain our cultural programs. It is simple to donate by visiting the IAAC website at iaac.us. Learn about the insider benefits that membership gives you. On behalf of the entire IAAC board, stay safe and see you at our next event. Thank you.